The passengers had long boarded the plane, stowed their luggage in the compartments, fastened their seat belts, and were waiting for takeoff. The flight attendants had already walked through the cabin several times, ensuring that the passengers were prepared for the flight. Near an older woman in business class, a steward stopped twice, requesting her to perform the necessary actions. She brushed him off, visibly annoyed, talking on the phone. "Please fasten your seatbelt and return your seat back to the upright position." The young man asked again. "Just give me a moment, I'm almost done," she replied, continuing her conversation. "Also, for a safe flight, please put your mobile devices on airplane mode." The flight attendant calmly informed her. This time, he didn't leave but stood beside her, waiting for compliance, signaling that she had to comply with the flight rules. "They're asking us to do all this even before the plane has taken off." The elderly passenger grumbled into her phone. "This is necessary for a safe flight." The flight attendant reiterated, "I've already paid for safety with my ticket." "They should have taken care of it differently," she suggested, despite her frustration. However, she eventually complied with all the requests. Once the steward walked away, she took out her laptop from her bag and again. The flight attendant approached her seat. "Sorry, but for your safety, we kindly request you not to use your laptop during takeoff," the young man politely asked. "She was in airplane mode," the woman exclaimed, visibly annoyed. "If there are any unexpected situations, you could get injured," the flight attendant explained. "Are you saying the pilots aren't highly qualified and won't allow any unexpected situations?" The lady sarcastically retorted. "Unfortunately, the crew cannot guarantee the absence of natural anomalies," the steward calmly replied. Finally, the woman rolled her eyes, set her laptop aside, and gazed out the window, projecting an air of importance. Juliet, well known in certain circles, was over 60 but still skillfully managed a small yet quite profitable firm that was renowned. In her hometown, she was accustomed to being recognized and respected, but she had overlooked the fact that she was now outside her familiar environment and away from her city. When your life unfolds in respected circles, it's quite unusual. While you may be someone important in your hometown in the business class of an airplane, you have to deal with your issues just like everyone else. She eagerly anticipated the moment when she could retrieve her laptop undisturbed. Although the airplane was ascending, the climb wasn't taking any longer than usual, at least not in Juliet's eyes. Time seemed to drag for her. She mentally condemned the aircraft's crew for their unprofessionalism and sluggishness. She even decided to note the takeoff time for herself, to ensure the pilots weren't cutting corners. She was used to checking everything. Most people tend to perform their duties half-heartedly, she thought. If she inquired why the plane was taking its time ascending, she believed there was no point. She'd undoubtedly receive a response designed to soothe passengers, but she was skeptical. Juliet knew the airline's business strategy all too well. With such thoughts, she was determined to monitor the team's actions to ensure they were following the rules. Juliet stared at the overhead panel, awaiting the clearance signal. As soon as the anticipated light turned on, the elderly woman reclined her seat tray and finally retrieved her brand new MacBook. She began examining the data hidden in the numerous tables, completely engrossed in the information she wanted to scrutinize. Juliet lost track of time as the flight attendants made an effort to quickly bypass the obstinate passenger. No one wanted to be subjected to the stern tongue lashing of this authoritative woman. Outwardly, she appeared well-groomed for her age, with her hair perfectly styled and generously lacquered in place. It seemed as if her hairstyle could survive an apocalypse without a single strand going out of place. Inside Juliet, however, she was far from a model of restraint. The calm waves on her head contrasted with the turbulent thoughts in her mind. Any external disturbance would trigger a wrathful tirade of discontent. And now, those taut internal strings were clumsily struck by a young man emerging from the restroom. Juliet's thoughts had been focused on another financial report, a report she had been reviewing for the past hour. In the midst of a sea of numbers, she spotted an error. The solution was just on the tip of her tongue, but she couldn't quite grasp it. She looked away from the spreadsheet, hoping to shift her focus elsewhere. It was at this moment that the young man coming out of the restroom caught her attention. Juliet's thoughts about the report temporarily vanished. Her mind shifted to something entirely different. She shot him a sideways glance, distracted by his presence, and then the young man made his way to the economy class cabin. Juliet momentarily forgot about her spreadsheet and immediately had a new thought. Why had this economy class passenger appeared here? She stood up, raising her voice in a question. Why is this passenger from economy class here? Reluctantly, a flight attendant approached. The young man, who had been noticed by the vigilant business class passenger, turned around, appearing a bit bewildered. He stammered, I need to use the restroom." Juliet, now fully aware of the ramifications of the situation, was absolutely infuriated. "I demand that, after this, you disinfect the lavatory," she pointed at the young man. "I refuse to sit in a lavatory where someone like him has been." One of the passengers in the cabin couldn't help but chuckle, and the flight attendants looked puzzled. One of them replied, "We assure you that the lavatories are regularly cleaned, and we take all necessary measures to ensure the passengers' comfort." An economy class passenger added, "I apologize, but the restroom in economy was occupied, and the flight attendants allowed me to use this one." Juliet was absolutely livid. "This is unacceptable. I won't tolerate sharing facilities with economy passengers." The situation had escalated, and Juliet's relentless pursuit of her own comfort was leading to a minor in-flight drama. "I will rewrite and translate the text for you. I will write inappropriate reviews about your airline, so that other people know what they are overpaying for. Why should I suffer from this?" Juliet said. A young man replied, "Suffering is like a poison that a person drinks willingly, and it means that they will harm someone else. Your life is not just what it offers you, but how you perceive it. If you took my action as an offense, I apologize because I can't prevent you from suffering." The elderly woman didn't know how to respond. She looked around for understanding glances among other passengers, but found only judgment. Nobody paid much attention to the young man's harmless act except Juliet, the experienced leader. She thought it was worth paying attention to and observed the visitors. To the restroom, the young man left. Valeryevna took some time to recover from the young man's unexpected response. In just 1 minute, a stranger had brought her back down to earth, leaving the woman in shock, and she began to contemplate her work tasks. Her mood had soured due to an error in a report that she had intended to reprimand the responsible employee for. She pondered how she always perceived everything negatively. Take this report, for example. It was the first time the employee had made a mistake. How many times had he completed his tasks without any issues? How many times had she praised him for it? She couldn't recall, not because it had happened many times, but most likely because it had never occurred. When she was presented with a perfect report, she never even thought about praising the person. But as soon as she spotted a small error, she was ready to lash out at the employee. The woman continued her flight, enjoying the in-flight movies. Suddenly, she felt suffocated and struggled to breathe. She requested a glass of water, and the flight attendant, handing her the glass, noticed her trembling hands. The steward's question was understood by her with difficulty. She tried to convey that something was wrong, but the words got stuck in her throat. She attempted to take deeper breaths, and the young flight attendant hurried to get assistance from the senior flight attendant. After that, Juliet remembered nothing. She lost consciousness after some time. She began to regain consciousness, half opening her eyes. She saw blurry silhouettes in which she could make out flight attendants. They were trying to say something, but the elderly woman felt as if she were in a closed jar where sounds couldn't penetrate the glass. Everything swayed before her eyes, making her head feel even heavier. She felt motion sickness from the commotion around her. She closed her eyes and tried to calm down. She sensed that she had been placed on a stretcher and intuitively understood that the plane had landed, and she was being handed over to a ground medical team. In the hospital, Juliet gradually came to her senses. She stared at a plastic bag with liquid from which a tube led to her head. The fog in her mind gradually dissipated, and, remembering her purpose, she became a businesswoman again, urgently demanding, "Is anyone here?" She raised herself in the ward, noticing 3 other women. There was an elderly woman so wrinkled that she barely resembled a human amidst the folds of her gray bedsheets. There was a young girl with headphones in her ears, seemingly disconnected from everything happening around her. Another elderly woman occupied the neighboring bed. The only one who seemed coherent, Juliet observed, for the others didn't even stir as if she didn't exist. "Where are my things?" Juliet suddenly grew anxious. She fell back into her familiar defensive posture, ready to fend off the chaos around her. However, she wasn't much different from most people who pre-script unfavorable scenarios in their heads without fully understanding what was happening. Juliet was convinced that she had been locked up in some government clinic, losing all her belongings along the way or having them stolen. "The bag you're looking for is on your nightstand, and the smaller one is inside," a neighboring elderly woman responded sympathetically. Juliet looked around and saw a nightstand next to her bed with her bag and laptop on it. She rushed to open the slightly skewed drawers and immediately found her branded handbag. After retrieving her phone, she began calling her colleagues. The woman in the adjacent bed looked at Juliet with sympathy, while Juliet glanced at her and continued to manage her work affairs. Eventually, she reassured herself that nothing catastrophic had occurred in the company in her absence, and her employees were carrying on with their tasks despite her unexpected disappearance. Juliet provided instructions even though she understood that people knew what to do without her. In the end, she set her phone aside and smiled at her neighbor. "I used to feel the same way at work," the woman began. "You always think you're irreplaceable, and without you, everything will fall apart. But no one died," she sighed sadly. "In reality, the world keeps turning even without us. We're like dogs in this job." She paused and stared out of the window. "Enough to die for," the woman next to Juliet concluded. Meanwhile, Juliet held up her still flawless hair. "Why take care of it in the hospital?" she thought, noting the loose curls. Her neighbor continued, "Worked half her life, only to end up in a hospital on the outskirts of town with a heart attack. Is it worth it?" Juliet reached out to her neighbor. "Indeed, things are going her way," she confirmed. "Maria," the woman next to her, shook her hand uncertainly. It was obvious that their level of wealth differed. "And what field do you work in?" asked Juliet. "I'm a house painter," Maria replied. "Thought the walls wouldn't paint as nicely without me. I have different walls. But I guess that doesn't take away from the fact that sometimes you have to think about yourself instead of them." As they came to their senses, the doctor entered the room and walked right up to Juliet. "May I congratulate you on your second birth, Juliet," he said, smiling. At first, the older woman was skeptical of the news. How many people survive a heart attack and stay alive? When you hear about a heart attack, the first thing you think of is that you've been blown away, she remarked. Juliet knew several people who had survived this unpleasant event and were still living. She believed that saving a person with a heart attack was not a problem these days. "If taken care of in time, of course," agreed the doctor, "and you were saved by a miracle. There was a man on the airplane who was able to massage the heart correctly and in time. More precisely, it wasn't a miracle, but one guy. If it hadn't been for him, the airplane might have been your final resting place." Juliet felt goosebumps as she listened to the story of her rescue. From the description, she knew it was the same guy she had scolded for going to the bathroom. The doctor withdrew and Maria came in to check on her elderly husband. The young girl continued to sit with her headphones on, oblivious to her surroundings. The grandmother was snoozing in the folds of her bed. Meanwhile, Juliet, putting aside her laptop, was contemplating life. The guy had a choice: save the unpleasant woman or sit silently in his chair, hoping someone else would come to the rescue. But despite the insult he received from her, he made the right choice. He chose to remain human and not spew his venom on the finicky female passenger. In the end, this act of kindness only hurt her because words hurt as much as any weapon. And when you send them at others, you should remember that those weapons can come back and hit you. Juliet decided for herself that she would now focus on the positive. She had already endured quite a bit in her life, and it was time to look on the bright side of the world. So, as she began to pull the bobby pins out of her hair, she began to transform her appearance. The passengers had long boarded